This presentation is directed at beginner winemakers or inexperienced winemakers. The process of making red wine is a pretty straightforward process. Fresh grapes are crushed and the stems removed. Next, the mixture of juice and solids is called must, is fermented with yeast to convert the sugar in the grapes to alcohol and carbon dioxide. When the fermentation is complete, the juice is pressed from the must and put in a container. In the first few days, a lot of sediment will settle to the bottom and it should be racked out. Racking is a process of either siphoning or pumping the juice from one container to another. Red winemakers like to go through a secondary fermentation called malolactic fermentation. This is a process of converting some of the harsh acids to a softer acid. This process takes about 4 to 6 weeks, and when complete, is transferred to long-term storage containers. During this period of time, things can be added to the wine to change or enhance the flavor. And the numbers in the wine can be adjusted along the way. In about a year, the wine is ready to bottle. You bottle it and wait a couple of months for bottle shock to remove, and then it's ready to drink. So that's the overall process. Now we're going to talk about each step in some detail. The crush, the very first part. First, you get the grapes from either your own vineyard or from a supplier. You crush the grapes and destem them. Now the target is just to break the skins. You don't really crush the seeds or anything. You want to break the grapes and you want to remove about 90% of the stems. Next you add SO2, which in its form is potassium metabisulfite. It's a very strong chemical used to kill the yeast that comes in from the wild and to kill any bacteria that were transported by the grapes. It can be used for sanitation and it can be used to adjust and protect the wine. I use a 1% solution of SO2 for sanitation, and I use a 10% solution adding to the wine for protection. Now we should test the sugar level, the pH, and the total acid of the wine, because at this point we want to adjust it, and adjusting it early makes for a better winemaking process. Our targets for grapes coming in should be between 23 and 25 Brix. Brix is a measure of sugar in grapes. It's pretty common. And if the sugar is below 23 Brix, you may want to add white table sugar to the wine to bring it up within range. If it's over 25 Brix, you're going to produce alcohol that's very high. The target pH is 3.4, and the target TA at this point is between 6 and 9 grams per liter. Over the period of winemaking, the pH tends to go up and the acid tends to go down. Our ultimate goal for pH is around 3.6. Now we have our mixture and we want to begin the fermentation process. We select a commercial yeast that matches our target wine. It's either a yeast for the particular grapes we have or to create a special taste, either a fruit forward or a very dry wine. And there are some yeasts that are tolerant to high alcohol. So select your yeast and then hydrate it according to the instructions, which means adding it to warm water and to mix nutrients which feed the yeast during the fermentation process. You add the yeast to the must and stir it thoroughly, and in about 2 days you'll notice the activity beginning. During fermentation, the carbon dioxide pushes the skins to the surface, called a cap. It's important that this cap be broken up often, sometimes 3 times a day, to encourage the transfer of color to the wine and to prevent any bacteria from accumulating in the cap. And now here is a punch down tool that makes it easy to mix up the wine and to break up that cap. You want to monitor it for yeast nutrition, and the best way to do that is just assume that the yeast is going to need nutrition about halfway through the fermentation, and you can add some more nutrients to the must. You should monitor the temperature as fermentation begins. As the process begins, the temperature begins to rise. If it gets too hot, if it gets above 90 degrees, you should cool it. And one way to cool home winemaking is to freeze a couple of gallon containers of water and just keep them on hand in your freezer. You can always place those in the must and bring the temperature back down. Again, now you measure sugar to tell when the fermentation process is both occurring and when it's complete. A couple of ways to do that. One is a hydrometer, which you put the juice in the container, you float the hydrometer and read the reading on the scale. The other way is to use a fractometer, and this is done by density. You put a couple of drops, hold it up to light, and you can read the reading on there. In both cases, alcohol in the fermentation affects the reading, and the numbers have to be adjusted to get the proper number. You decide when to press. If you want a dry wine, you want the brix to be down to 0. And some people will choose, because they don't get enough color extraction from their wine, to do what's called an extended maceration, which basically means keeping the juice on the skins for up to 2 months to get further extraction. I actually use a enzyme during fermentation, which encourages the full extraction of color, and I don't have to worry about the risks of extended maceration. Without CO2 being generated, you have the danger of bacteria getting into your wine. So what most people have to do is they have to put a gas, an inert gas, on top of the must and cover the must. So fermentation is complete. Now you need to have the containers clean and sanitized to receive the juice. You press the juice from the must and put it in containers. Free-run wine is that juice which you get without actually pressing it, and pressed wine you get when you actually squeeze it. And there's a couple of presses, a basket press and a bladder press. A bladder press exerts much less pressure on the wine and tends to create a softer wine. So you transfer the wine to containers. You minimize the head space because you don't want air to get to the wine. You add airlocks on the containers, which allows the CO2 to escape and to prevent air from coming into the wine. After a couple of days, you want to rack off the juice from the gross lees. This is the thick sediment that goes almost directly to the bottom. It's the dead yeast cells and other stuff that's accumulated during fermentation, and you want to discard that. And you can add air during this first racking by basically holding the hose out and letting the wine go through the air. After this point, you want to minimize any air contact with the wine all the way to completion. Now, I said that red winemakers want to go through MLF, or malolactic fermentation. It's not truly a fermentation, but it does generate carbon dioxide, so that's why it's called a fermentation. It's a bacteria. and it converts malic acid, which is a very harsh acid in the wine, to a lactic, which is a very soft one. The other acids occurring in wine are citric acid and tartaric acid. It's tartaric acid that we use to adjust the numbers, the acid numbers in wine. Now the process for doing MLF is to purchase bacteria from your supplier, and you hydrate it just like you did with the yeast and mix it into the wine. Now the process for MLF, depending on temperature, takes from 4 to 6 weeks. And so you should stir the new lees that have settled to the bottom every month or so and keep an airlock on there. Remember that MLF does generate CO2, and we want to let that escape. You can add oak during MLF, and you can add oak in any number of ways, from cubes to chips to spirals to staves, any number of ways to do that. And there are French oak, American oak, Hungarian oak. There's all kinds of oak that you can choose to add for your oak. You want to maintain the temperature at least 70 degrees to allow it to complete. And I have actually put an electric blanket around a barrel to help keep that minimum temperature of 70 degrees. Now we test for the completion of MLF using test strips, which are very inaccurate, but they give you an idea of how it's progressing. Or you can purchase one of these, which is a malolactic chromatography, and you put a solution in here and a paper with the samples on it, and in about 2 days you can read the level of fermentation that's occurred. And it's a very accurate way of showing when MLF is complete. Once MLF is complete, you can put it in containers to store, and you can put it in any number of containers, the keg, the glass, the barrels, and you should adjust the numbers. When we adjust the numbers during long-term aging, we want to do a couple of things. One, we want to add SO2 to protect the wine long-term. We want to evaluate the pH. Remember, we started at around 3.4, but over time the pH tends to go up. So if the pH is now climbed to 3.8, we want to bring it back down, because the higher the pH, the more chance that you're going to have spoilage or bacteria in your wine. The TA is the total acid or titratable acid in the wine, and we can adjust the pH by adding acid to the wine. In the case of pH and TA, you can adjust the acid by adding tartaric acid. Tartaric acid will raise the acidity in the wine, and it will lower the pH. We also want to now add SO2 to protect the wine from bacteria. So I'll show you a chart in a minute of how to determine how much SO2 to add periodically. You can add oak here too instead of MLF. You can add, and you can also add other things that will either modify or change the flavor of your wine. You want to top any barrels with wine, because you do have evaporation occurring in barrels. So you need to keep the wine at the very top of the barrel and cover them tightly. Long-term storage should be stored between 55 and 60 degrees. The temperature is not so important as maintaining a kind of a consistent temperature. And you should taste. You should taste and test all through this process to see how it's going. And the tasting will be different each time you taste. Before you bottle, I'm showing you the chart on how to determine how much SO2 to add. It's dependent on the pH value. So let's say that our final pH was at 3.5. We look at the chart and we see that we need 40 parts per million of SO2 to protect the wine at that level of pH. Now, even if you buy new bottles to put your wine in, you should make sure that they're sanitized. And you can sanitize them with SO2, a diluted mixture, or I use iodine, which is diluted and is much safer to use around winemaking. Iodine can be diluted and put in a container, and every instrument that you use during fermentation can be dipped into the solution and kept clean and sanitized. So you bottle your wine, and after a couple of months, when bottle shock has dissipated, it's ready to drink. So now you can enjoy the fruits of your labor.